Welcome to the Adventurous Ageing Podcast, and I'm your host, Rachel Woolston. This is where we challenge the idea that getting older means slowing down or settling for less. If you want a body and a life that keeps up with you, hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Tina Woods. At 52, she launched a health tech startup from a blank sheet of paper, and at 60, she became a DJ. Now, she's running Longevity Raves, proving that dancing and connection might do more for how long and how well we live than anything you'll find in a lab. So I'm delighted to be joined on the Adventurous Ageing Podcast today by Tina Woods, who also goes by the moniker of Tina Technotic, who became a DJ at the age of 60.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but you would never expect it, because reading your LinkedIn, it looks like Bachelor of Arts in Genetics and Development from Cornell University, MBA in Business. You're CEO of Collider Health. So that's a bit of a leap. So how did that come about?
So it's well, first of all, yes, I kind of see it as my day job and my night job, but actually it's all interlinked. But DJing has sort of kind of been a bit of a surprise. I would never have imagined 2 years ago that I would be sort of this international DJ, which seems to have emerged. But yeah, I mean, it has essentially evolved out of my own sort of personal story, and it's very, very, very linked with my professional story. So yeah, I studied genetics a very long time ago. I was pre-med. I thought I would be a doctor. In the end, I decided not to be a doctor and ended up working with the biotech and pharma industry for many years. But Collider Health, I set up about 9 years ago. I wanted to do something a bit different. I was really interested in how technology was going to impact our health, and essentially I had a bit of a blank sheet when I started at the age of 52 with Collider Health. And it was when my sons were starting to go off to university, and of course entered a new kind of period in my life, menopause, everything, all kinds of change. And so Collider Health was my attempt to start to work out how do you actually take a very broken model of healthcare, which I called sick care, to a much more sort of health and wellness paradigm. And I was really interested in the role of technology on that. So that kind of set me up to do all the things that I've been doing over the last 9 years. And the DJing came out of an epiphany when I was 56, when it was just post-COVID, the lockdown lifted and people were out in the streets again. I went to a party with a couple of girlfriends. We ended up coming back at about 11:30. We didn't want to go to bed. We thought, well, why don't we just go dancing? And I just had this thunderbolt sort of moment that dancing and music was just going to change my life. And it certainly has. I started dancing a lot. I went back to my Zumba classes. I started going to clubs all the time and getting really interested in the music. And then, of course, my husband was wondering what the hell had happened to his wife, because I had just become this different kind of person in a way, with my energy and my joy and all the things that were happening. And he started coming out with me, and he thought, yeah, it's a bit soulless, all this Ironman training on a Sunday morning when I see you coming back late at night from having this wonderful night of dancing. So he started coming dancing with me, and so he's now my chief dancing partner. But the DJing was by accident, because I realized at 59 that if I was going to keep dancing the way it was and still do all my exercise, I'm very physically active, and also I love mountain climbing and things like that with my husband as well, my feet were going to become real problems, because I had deformed feet after years of letting bunions get completely out of control, wearing ill-fitting shoes. And so they were really deformed. It wasn't so much the sight of them, which were pretty bad, but it was actually the pain that really then made me realize I'm going to have to get my feet fixed. And I knew that the loss of my mobility would be crucifying if I just couldn't do all the stuff that I love doing. So I kind of bit the bullet, spent a few months finding the right surgeon, because I was terrified of them basically ruining my feet. Found the right surgeon, did all the Olympic athletes and tennis stars. So I thought, well, if he can do their feet, he can certainly have a go at mine. And then I had this very complex surgery. Over a period of 2 months, I had to do one foot first and then the other one. And I was told that it would take at least 4 to 6 months of recovery before I could go back to anything resembling my normal physical activity levels. And that absolutely horrified me. And I thought, how am I going to cope with this? Through a few weird moments, I remember responding to a LinkedIn post from one of my very good friends who runs a health tech startup. And she's an ex, DJ herself. And she started a new band. She was writing about this on LinkedIn. Kind of wrote this message kind of without even thinking about it. I said, oh, great. That's great to hear what you're doing. I kind of fancied the idea of becoming a DJ by the time I turned 60. And that was about 6 months away, and was right before I got my surgery booking firm. And then I started talking to my dancer friend who is now a co-founder and my co-DJ, Yukari, who's less than half my age. We met each other on the dance floor. We used to go dancing a lot. And I said to Yukari, you know what, Yukari, I think I'm gonna go crazy with this recuperation. So I'm thinking I might learn how to mix music. to stave off my impending depression and doom and gloom and keep me distracted. And she said, well, it's funny because I've just started picking it up myself. I'd quite like to kind of learn how to DJ. So we kind of thought, well, let's do it together. And then we had our first longevity rave in July, and I turned 60 in the March. And the rest is history. I mean, it's just really taken off for all sorts of reasons.
Brilliant. Let's unpack that a little bit, because there are so many things in that short story which are quite trailblazing. Firstly, setting up another company at 52, that in and of itself, dancing. And then also, I think that's really interesting as well about that whole learning piece in longevity. Obviously, I think you've spoken in an interview about the interconnectivity between joy, longevity, and health, which I find really interesting. But because with longevity, and you've even written a book about live longer with AI, it has become very technical, data driven. But what's really interesting about the DJing is it is data and tech, because you've had to learn that bit, which is really important. But then there's that joy bit. So let's kind of, have you always been somebody who expectations, do you think? Expectations are that you wouldn't go and set up another company at 52. It's quite an interesting stage in women's lives, isn't it? That life chapter.
It was an interesting stage, and I'm very curious. I mean, I just love new things, learning new things. So my curiosity, need to learn all the time, is sort of what propels me forward all the time. And I'm curious at all levels: people, technology, anything new, anything that's sort of ahead of us, whatever. And I'm not a particularly nostalgic or sentimental person. I'm always looking forward to things. There's so much excitement and opportunity ahead. And of course, now getting older, of course, it's in the moment that is really, really important, and that we can come on to, which is where the rave comes in. So so I think I've always been naturally that sort of person, and I've always, I'm very entrepreneurial, and that's always been my sort of history, just generally. And, because I love diving into new things, feel the fear and do it anyway. I mean, maybe it's a bit foolhardy sometimes, but when I set up the business at 52, I kind of knew I wanted to do something different with my life. And this is where a lot of people experience this in midlife. You're kind of looking, well, where's my coming from in life? You know, I've kind of been so focused on keeping the show on the road, being a mom, three very challenging boys when they're younger. And then, of course, keeping the show on the road, the income coming in and all that kind of stuff, and being a wife and, you know, household and all that kind of stuff. And you kind of you just get into this sort of groove, and you don't even start thinking about all the other things that you can be doing until you have that point. And this is where I reached the age of 52 when my sons, they were going to be okay. I mean, all kids nowadays have challenges that, as we know, with the mental health crisis and all the rest of it, and the whole digital world that we've entered. And I kind of have seen my sons going through that whole digital world. And funnily enough, it's one of the triggers for why we started Longevity Rave, because we need to learn how to be back in real life. Serendipity, but the chaos of life, which is basically how we used to do things in the old days, and relying on our communities and networks to find people and meet people and find love, and all that's kind of disappeared. And that's one of the reasons why Longevity Rave is so important, is to address this huge social disconnection, loneliness and isolation that we're finding not just in the younger population, but across all age groups. So that's a fundamental role that Longevity is trying to play, and obviously understand the whole business of what human connection, the need for love, and just feeling the energy of people and the real physical kind of, you could just never get in an online situation, and no matter what metaverse is would have given us. It's just, there's just no way, because there's something very primal and tribal, and sort of, it kind of goes back. This is where my genetics and my whole sort of scientific background comes in. We have an evolutionary and ancestral history that is part of who we are in our genetics, and actually how we impact, and how our genetics are impacted by the world in which we live, and actually this modern life that we have created through, you know, social media, and like not walking around enough because we use cars, and eating all this ultra high processed food, and then relying on drugs and the pharma companies to rescue us when we're sick, and doctors and hospitals, and just the sort of the despair that so many of us have about this modern world, with all the problems and woes that we're seeing, and of course the threat of AI taking over our humanity. All this is creating this sort of environment for a very, very poor health. So I think, I think going back to Collider Health, I was really, really interested in and I realized looking back now, because I had a blank sheet of paper, I mean, I had no name, and I actually felt a bit of an imposter going into this tech world, because it's fascinating, the world of tech. Yeah. Of course, a lot of the tech was Silicon Valley, big tech bros, you got a lot of guys. And here I was entering, 52. And of course, I had all the kind of menopausal stuff going on, and thinking, what the hell am I doing? And I just kind of battled through. And then one thing led to another. And I used a lot of networks to get some really interesting projects. One was actually a very interesting project looking at the impact of AI on the NHS. And this is actually 8 years ago. And actually that led me to become an AI expert very, very quickly, because all the AI in those days was all in fintech, and we're looking at the impact in healthcare. And then that sort of led me down some really interesting paths, to the point where this is where the book comes in. I was literally approached by a tech publisher to write this book. And I was thinking, my God, how am I being considered an AI expert? But there I was. And then I got some really interesting work with UK Research and Innovation on the Healthy Aging Challenge. And that got me really involved in healthy aging and longevity. And then the rest is kind of history. And I sort of realized, looking back, that really what I was doing was really working out the big drivers of system change. And I worked and did a very interesting stint working very closely with government and policy making around the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity. And that was 4 years. And that was my first foray really understanding that whole, because that's a really important part of the puzzle. And then with the business world. And of course, now what's interesting with Longevity Rave, and I'm a bit astonished by how it's really sort of caught on. It's a really fantastic way of engaging with the general public on this message, which is this whole kind of health, wellness, and longevity space that has basically been exploding over the last 2 to 3 years, especially post-COVID. It's not just about the drugs and the molecules and the supplements and all the stuff that we're finding out in animal studies in the lab. We have to understand humans and how we are in our real world. And so I often talk about this, and this is where I go around the world and speak at conferences all the time, and then do maybe an after party longevity rave. It seems to be a common formula right now, but it is about this new frontier, as I call it, of longevity, which is actually really understanding human flourishing. And that means our need for love, our need for hope, optimism, our spirituality, being creative, our emotional needs. And this goes back to our tribal ancestry, where we thrived in tightly knit communities, and we need to bring that back. And so that and now, of course, the irony is we now have all these frontier technologies, and I love all these technologies. I mean, we've got all this sort of AI, this AI agents, and then quantum sensing and all that sort of stuff. And we are now reached a point where we can actually really start to look at the individual level of the impacts of our worlds on our biology. Now, that has never been really before possible. And that's actually the holy grail of all the clinics. And you may have been hearing about these longevity clinics. And of course, I work with a lot of these clinics. They are all there to try and see what you need at an individual level to help you on your health journey, and to be able to track progress with all the fancy stuff like biomarkers and all the technologies and diagnostics and things like that. It's still kind of a art at the moment, really, because we still need that science to tell us what is happening. It's not just at a population level, it's actually what is happening to us as individuals, because we are all unique, and that's our unique biology, our unique genetics, but they all are our environment completely impacts how we express ourselves, and our phenotype. Epigenetics, they call it. So that's my real big area, and I'm now really interested in understanding, like, what is the science behind human connection? Why is it that we absolutely need it and need to be in the real worlds together again? Which is why,
And talking about it from a personal point of view, so how did it change how you felt about yourself when you started going to these raves before you became a DJ? And had you ever been in the dance culture before that, ever?
So not in the serious way that I am now. So I mean, I kind of went to clubs in my 20s like everyone does, and I like a bit of a dance and and all that kind of stuff, and you'd meet people going out, all that kind of stuff are the reasons why you go out, right? But it never became this sort of, I don't know, this calling that it was almost like it answered the need for my whole creative soul to come out. And also, I guess it kind of reconnected, because, often when women go through the menopause and this sort of midlife, you kind of lose touch with yourself as a sexual being, you kind of think of yourself as the mom, like this workhorse, and you kind of lose touch with just like your more kind of primal self. Do you know what I mean? And so I think it kind of just all came together. And as I mentioned, in this thunderbolt moment of mine on the dance floor, and it was just the energy. And I think it was really wonderful seeing the reactions also on the dance floor at that one time that I went, which is kind of the reactions I often still get, and now, of course, with my husband as well, is that we had a lot of young people, the girls and then the guys, and they all really loved the fact that, these 56-year-old women were there having a great old time. And it was really great. And it was just this feeling of just euphoria. It was kind of like this sort of humanness that just sort of connects you. And this is the thing. It's like we have to remember that there's this humanness. And this is where music is a language that speaks to all of us. And dancing is, anyone can do it. And you just can, the whole age thing, or who you are, or like what you are, or like whether you're gay, whatever. It just dissolves, it disappears. And that is the beauty of what you get in that environment. And I'm so struck by that. And that's sort of like what we're trying to understand from a scientific perspective, because what I know is that, boy, when you feel the way that you feel when you're dancing, and there's all the biochemical stuff going on and the neurochemical
Yeah.
stuff, that has a huge impact on your health. And of course, I'm interested in the long-term effects of that. So that's what we're trying to
So
study.
we're looking at both the interconnection, the connection that you have with others in that particular space, and the effect of the dancing in that space. And I suppose the kind of the beat of the music can also impact.
There's a whole bunch of research on that. So I'm working with all sorts of people now who are experts in their field about the power of music and group dancing, group synchrony, entrainment, all those sorts of, there's a whole bunch of research on that. So one of the things, and I'm fascinated by all that because, it goes back again, going back to our ancestral kind of, our legacy, from, our evolutionary legacy. We are very, very struck by the rhythms of nature, by the heartbeat of your mother in the womb. And it's the rhythm of the heartbeat. It's like, these are the sounds that our bodies naturally respond to, and the beat and the bass line, and all these things have a really powerful effect on you. So this is where we are so interconnected, just like they're finding like root structures, root systems in trees. They communicate, mushrooms. There's this intricate system that has been evolving for millions and millions of years about how we're so interconnected. And so I think there's a lot in there, and about how frequencies, even at a cellular level, and vibrations and all these sorts of things. That's where some really interesting research is taking place. So what I'm doing is, and we just launched this in December, in this frontier tech tower in San Francisco, called the Joy Score experiment. So it's all about how do you actually measure this whole feeling that you get when you are connected, when you are feeling just so wonderful and euphoric and joyful. And so it's the science behind human connection that we're trying to understand and unpick using all the latest technologies, and also in the longevity world with biomarkers, whether it's in your blood, saliva, sweat, and then of course brainwave activity and all the rest, and how we can pull that together using AI to spot the patterns at an individual level, all that kind of stuff. We're trying to work out the metric that you can then, because then what you can then do is you can show, well, this activity, whether it's a rave or whether it's an experience or being in a beautiful place or on the sea or whatever it is, this will increase your feelings of joy and connection and all that. And then once you can measure it, and this is my work in policy and business investment, preparing the investment case and the business case and all that kind of stuff, the health economics. If you have the data and have the evidence to show the link between how important that whole kind of psychosocial and we're obviously looking at it from the positive side, then you can actually then start to think, well, hang on a second, why am I putting this money here when we've left it too late? People are really sick and broken and depressed. Put it move upstream in health and invest in creating beautiful places and making sure people aren't, are where you're tapping into that feeling that we need, is getting communities and intergenerational spaces, and invest in that. And then we've got the evidence to show why it's so important, being close to nature, having parks near you, it's all that sort of stuff. And so that will hopefully then be the system change stuff that is my day job, so to speak.
Yeah. And talking about that intergenerational space, I notice now with my friends who are into clubbing that suddenly they're going typically sometimes maybe they've afternoon raves, and therefore I'm not sure how intergenerational that is in your experience, where not in the longevity raves, because that's possibly where you're obviously, it is intergenerational, but outside of that, do you find when you're clubbing yourself dancing that it is intergenerational, or does it at the moment, is it still very kind of split?
Well, I think it's quite mixed. There's a lot of stats that showing that older people are coming back out again and going to raves and things like that, and I'm obviously a very good example of that. But it depends obviously on the type of scenario and situation. So what we're seeing, we're actually kind of looking and looking at these trends and incorporating them in some of the way that we're running and planning our longevity raves as well. Yes, there's definitely a move towards more sort of daytime kind of raving now, and that's for lots of different reasons. I think for the older generation, or for those sort of in the kind of the midlife, as I call it, when they've got families, or when they don't want to go out too late, and of course Gen Z, they don't drink, and of course they like to be, they like sober places to rave, and then there's this whole thing around women wanting safe places where you tend to, if you go to a rave where there's less alcohol, or it's during the daytime, there's less sort of those sort of dangers, as it were, that some people are worried about. So I think there's a lot in there. And actually, the last rave that we did was a bit of an experiment to kind of test out whether the sort of a slightly earlier rave is better. And what we found, like for example, a lot of the raves that I've been asked to do as after parties, for example, at longevity conferences, they tend to what we tend to do is mix obviously the conference crowd, which tends to be older, and then we make sure that we get the younger crowds in. But then we have a rave that's like 7 till 11. So it's like long enough you can kind of really get into the flow, but it's not so late that everyone can get home. And actually, if you're a real purist on the longevity front, you kind of want your sleep. You want your Oura ring to tell you, oh yeah, you've had your 8 hours, you're okay. Now, I'm not a purist like that, and I'm much more flexible with my own kind of lifestyle regime, partly because that's just who I am. And I'm very happy going raving at all crazy hours till the morning and all the rest of it. And I always just make sure I get my sleep kept caught up afterwards and all the rest of it. So it is different strokes for different folks. But yes, I would say there's been a lot of trend towards, and I think it's a little bit of a fad, I think, to be honest, with some, you had Zumba, and then there's like all these weird like other fads, like fitness fads. There's always has to be something new. So I think there's a little bit of the day rave kind of catching that kind of like the fitness centers and, leisure centers are all kind of like offering the day rave as a bit of, it's a bit so you kind of hear about it. But I guess it kind of depends also on what I found, really the sort of person that you are. So certainly when I go out to the clubs, and some of them are more, underground alternative clubs, and then I also go to the mainstream kind of clubs, the techno clubs. I would say it's increasingly a bit more mixed, and I'm not always the oldest person there with my husband. I would say, and I definitely see quite a few older people, like plus 40. And we did some of the analysis in our own raves, and it's very mixed, very, very mixed. But we deliberately try and encourage that mix in the way that we market it and our package and what we offer. Yeah.
And you must have been asked this question loads of times. How do you actually stay up? How do you manage that?
This is where my physical fitness is obviously absolutely key to this. I'm extremely fit because I exercise, and that's like one of my non-negotiables. I'm religious about my exercise, and that's the most powerful thing that you can do to increase your chances for a long, healthy, happy life, is just get your exercise. So I'm really fit as a person. And of course, because I dance so much, it also keeps me fit. And that's part of my exercise. So it's kind of like a virtuous circle. And then, of course, the music. I mean, if I'm in a place where I just love the music and love the DJ, and of course, now I'm much more close to what I like. And I know the DJs who I like, and I'll follow them and I'll see them. And the music keeps you like, it's like a drug. I mean, it just like, it makes you feel come alive. So I think, for all those factors, and just had the fun factor. And so that is basically the recipe. And do what you love, because what you love, it gives you the energy to keep going. And that is so simple, but it's so powerful and it's so effective.
I wanted to ask you a question about, because I have no idea what it would be like to learn how to DJ. Like, it used to be just literally like the turntables, and now it looks really digital and like, what was that like to learn that? And what was that like your very first? I mean, have you done some awful clanging mistakes where you're like, oh God, get me off the deck?
There's mistakes all the time. The crowd just doesn't notice it. So there's always going to be little mistakes that people will never notice. But anyway, digital DJing is a hell of a lot simpler than vinyl. So I'm lucky that that's where the digital age has been my friend. I've always been very comfortable with kind of using all this sort of stuff. So in a sense, it's kind of like learning a new language or designing your own website, which I've done many times. So it's kind of like an extension of just being technically competent and used to working with tools. And what people respond to more than anything is just my energy and my passion for the music and the vibe. And that's the most important thing. There's the energy of the crowd, and there's this whole kind of language and communication that you've got with the crowd. That is at the heart of the art of DJing. Stuff, it's great, but actually that's kind of like that's not the most important thing, I would say. But so how I learned was very, very simple. And when I first declared to my family that I might learn how to mix music when I was contemplating this foot surgery, a week before that Christmas, this would have been in, I guess, 2023. So December. So I got as a Christmas present, the week after my surgery, a DDJ 200 sort of gizmo, Pioneer DDJ 200. And that is a very simple setup where you can, hook it up to your laptop and you can just learn how to do basic mixing, right? So, and the most important part is actually just learning your vibe. Like, what is the music that you really like? So the most of my time in those early days was spent, kind of just doing basic mixing, which once you learn how to beat match and like simple things like that, learning how to synchronize, the beats of two different tracks that you're trying to mix, that's relatively straightforward. And more of the skill and the art is in actually curating your list. So I was listening to a lot of music, learning what I liked, had a whole bunch of working playlists. And then of course I starred them, or like, which ones did I like most? And I had this whole kind of process going on. And then you're kind of then mastering all the other, so the DJ software. Like I use Rekordbox and I use Beatport to get my tracks that I can then import into Rekordbox, and then sort of actually do some recordings and things like that. So learn the mixing bit better. And we decided to hold our longevity rave as a thing, which was in July July. So basically 6 months after I first started learning how to mix. And of course, because I'm so busy with my day job, I didn't really have that much practice, really. And then I suddenly thought, oh my God, we've got this gig booked on the 6th of July and we have over 200 people coming.
Wow.
And then I realized, goodness, I've got to make sure I don't completely cock up here. So I had 2 or 3 like sort of panic lessons with Pirate Studios where I got a DJ to kind of take me through the steps, which actually confused me more than anything because they'd assumed I was more competent than I was. So they're all telling me all these things. And of course, each one had a different trick, and I was like, I'm getting even more confused. I'm going to stop. So in the end, somehow we managed to get through the first gig. And it was amazing. And of course, I had a lot of people behind me. I had a couple more experienced DJs, and everyone had each other's back.
It's interesting because during hormone change, often what really hits people is anxiety and like fear of doing the new because you just overthink it. So it's really interesting. Do you think actually DJing has helped you? I mean, you were kind of post-menopause probably when you started DJing, but you can still get those issues of anxiety.
Sure.
Do you think that really has helped you in a way?
I've always dived into the unknown because I find that fun and exciting. So my curiosity always takes over. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And so it's never the fear. It's more the curiosity that makes me kind of leap. So I sort of, and even I remember in my 20s, I was absolutely terrified of public speaking. I mean, I was absolutely, whereas now it's like, I can do it because I've got practice. And I just become more used to it. And I kind of feel the DJing thing is yet another thing where you feel the fear and just do it anyway. And so, yes, of course, all of us, it's very normal to have a bit of performance anxiety. I still get a bit of the nerves, But then once you're in it and you get into the flow, then of course that just completely takes over.
And I think that brings it to quite a nice close, actually, about curiosity and curious to learn, because I personally also think that is the key to aging well. What would you
Honestly, I think that is probably one of the most important factors. And it kind of goes down to this whole thing around, we're all on this quest, we're on this life journey, seeking meaning in our lives. Like, why are we here? Religion has helped a lot of people with that. And of course, that's one of the scourges of today. I mean, we don't have, for a lot of young people, they don't have religion to turn to. So where do they turn to? And I think, and I'm not a religious person either. So I have found meaning in my life through obviously a lot of the stuff that I'm doing now. I know that I will die the day I stop learning, because learning replenishes and energizes and emboldens you and gives you the energy. It's that sort of the fun. So I do think it's a very, very important quality. You can either react in a certain way. I mean, I could have reacted, to this foot surgery just by getting really depressed, but there's always there's always an upside if you look for it. And I think, that's where the curiosity and the learning can really help, to help you find that upside. If you look for it, then you have to be curious, you have to look for it, and you have to see it in a different way. So I think it's a huge part of it. And this is part of the new frontier, which I'm actually trying to understand, because I think it's one of the biggest, this is absolutely the biggest part that I think we need to understand to really, really thrive and flourish and have a really fantastic, joyful life. And then if you live in the moment, every day is going to be fantastic. And then you're probably going to be ready to give up when you die, and then letting go and let someone else.
I suppose that's the beauty of raving, dancing, is that you are in the moment and you can let go of other things. Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Adventurous Ageing Podcast. Really, I better get my dance shoes back on.